Welcome to this review of Zorin OS 16.1. In particular, the edition that I have here is the Core Edition, so that's the free edition that you can download from their website. They do have a paid version that has a little more desktop layouts, which I'll touch on here momentarily, but I just basically wanted to give the OS a try. And why am I trying out Zorin? Well, I have a few reasons for giving this one a try. The first one is basically it's kind of weird, but I was focusing on if you go to distrowatch.com, it says these distros have their origin in Ireland. So for some reason, I just felt like choosing Irish distributions, even though the majority of people working on these distributions now aren't really Irish anymore. But that was just a little silly aspect of my part, basically. More importantly, though, I looked at Zorin OS and I was looking at trying out Ubuntu based distributions. And Zorin OS, I chose it because they're very slow to get their updates. Whereas some of the other Ubuntu based distributions may have their updates already available or coming out soon that will be based off of Ubuntu 2204. Zorin OS, I felt pretty confident that it won't have an update anytime soon just by looking at the release history. So, not even by the end of this year do I think they'll even have a version of Zorin OS based off of 2204. And that's really not a knock on them as a development team because, from what I understand, it's a fairly small development team, like a couple of brothers or something. So, it's not a huge development team. So, I don't want to make it sound like I'm casting shade at them or anything. It's just that's the fact of the matter is they're very slow to get out updates based on the new versions of Ubuntu. So I kind of went with them first because I was like, I'm not going to sit here and wait around for them to come out with a new version, which could literally be months or a year away. Second of all, another reason I wanted to look at them is because they have a very interesting software layout for something based off of Ubuntu 2004. So I have here a NeoFetch window open to kind of show you what's going on here with Zorin OS that I'm running. So you see here it says Zorin OS 16.1. And one of the things that they've done, and I've seen some of these distros based off of Ubuntu 2004 or even Debian Buster, I believe, or whatever the latest stable Debian is. One of the things they've got around uh, newer hardware not working on the old kernel is a lot of them have this 513 kernel so that if you're running, say, a Ryzen based CPU, you can actually use the distribution now. So that was one interesting aspect of this particular distro. Why I chose, well, actually, I didn't really know at the time that it was running 513. So that was kind of a nice surprise. But more importantly, and I don't think you can see it here, it doesn't have it here, but basically, it had a newer version of the NVIDIA software drivers, which I might be able to, let's do this here. So at the time of this recording, so there you go, 51073-05. So it actually had a more up-to-date version of the NVIDIA drivers than, say, Solus Linux, which is a rolling-based distribution, which is very interesting that was an aspect here. So that was something that kind of intrigued me as well with Zorin. And another neat thing from a NVIDIA user perspective is when you first boot up Zorin operating system off of your USB drive, it gives you the option to boot into a NVIDIA kernel for your first boot. And so it can get going working with NVIDIA drivers like from the word go. So it's actually very convenient, and it was something that definitely was something I wanted to look into. Let me get out of that. So that was a really neat aspect of the operating system that kind of drew me to it in the first place. And so I gave it a try, and I haven't quite used it a full 2 months because there was about a couple of weeks where I was away from my computer and I didn't have any access to it. So I'd say closer to roughly 45 days of working with Zorin OS, but I think I've got a pretty good feel for the operating system and my feelings for it. Another aspect of it is this OS runs the GNOME environment, desktop environment, and a very highly customized version of the GNOME desktop environment. I believe it did mention this in NeoFetch, but maybe it didn't. I thought it had a version number for GNOME. I think it's like GNOME 38 or something. It's an older version. It's definitely not the version 4 that's out now on the newer distribution. So it is an older version of GNOME, but it is highly customized. Um, so I just wanted to give this a try because I'm not really anxious to jump into the GNOME pool, as it were, at this point. But this one, they cater to people who like a more Windows-based layout. So one of the things they have for that is this tool called Zorin Appearance. And in this appearance, I use this layout here. So these are the 4 layouts you get for free, and these other 4 layouts you have to pay money for, the Zorin OS Pro. And so you can just basically click around. So this is more like I guess you'd say a Windows 10 type layout. You click on this, it's more of a, I don't know, Windows 7 type layout where the taskbar looks, well, the taskbar still looks pretty much the same. This one here's the new Windows 11 style that people for some reason seem to like. But it also does this when you click on the start menu. It does all that interesting stuff. I'm definitely not a huge fan of that. And then you have this one, which is more of almost like your typical GNOME setup in a way. Um, yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I prefer this one, maybe that one if I was, being flaky or deciding which one I want to go with. But I think this is more typical for someone who likes a Windows type layout, and so I think this just fits me better. They do have some theming built in a little bit. I downloaded this GNOME Professional one, which actually works pretty good. Let me see here. Well, there was a theme thing where you could actually choose the different type of icons and whatnot. I'm not finding it right now. Maybe if I clicked on Zorin, yeah, you could change the accent color. The background can be either light, dark, or it can change depending upon time of day. So you can actually do that as well. Um, the icons I chose were like Zorin gray, so I just seemed to look better to my eyes. Basically, I tried the red, but I don't know, it just didn't look good to me. So this Zorin appearance is actually pretty decent as far as changing the actual look of your desktop environment, and I kind of like it. It definitely looks good from a visual perspective. You have the wobbly windows here. They have a lot of sound effects, like when you have little pop-up windows, you might get a little sound kind of. Um, and so stuff like that's really neat. Um, let me look at some other stuff here. So you got the settings menu, which you have a lot more detail there. You got your Wi-Fi network, um, get your different applications and whatnot here, and different backgrounds. So these are like all the backgrounds that come with the program itself. So these are all default. In fact, I believe this background that I have right now, it is also a time of day based background, so it will actually get lighter or darker depending on what time of day it is. That's a really neat background. I think that's kind of cool. That's why I put it up here for this video. But they have things of that nature, like you have displays. I have 2 displays, and I have them mirrored on each other, which is the way I like to have it set up. But you can actually, change it from mirror to basically extend your displays, and you can mess around with all those settings here. You can your screensaver type behavior and whatnot. You can mess with that here. So this is basically the settings menu that you get with Zorin OS, and it's a pretty decent menu. There's a lot of options there, and it pretty much works. It's a lot like a control panel, for lack of a better word. So that's pretty decent. Now, I will say there are certain aspects of this operating system that I've noticed just don't work. And the very first one I would point out would be this right here. This is the software center that they have. It's actually pretty decent if you want to go looking for software or you want to just search for a package basically and you're looking for something in particular. They have a couple of categories down here which are nice. So it's good for installing things. So let's actually all these people online, they always look for this Kden Live thing. So let's click on that real quick. And I'll show you real quick what I mean about it not working. So Kden Live, I can come here and you see there's a flat hub package version, and let's see what it says here. So that's version 2204. So another aspect of this, why I want to look at it, so with these older Ubuntu-based distros, one of the things they get around with the very slow rollout of updates is they focus a lot on Flatpak. And that's actually a pretty decent idea because if you notice here, the FlatHub version is 2204 and FlatHub is enabled by default. But if you look at the package version, well, I mean, the versions don't really line up, do they? That says 419, whereas FlatHub says 2204. So the version numbers actually don't line up very well here. And I'm not exactly sure what the KDE apps version is. It looks like it's the same thing. And I'm also not sure why it's listed twice. Oh, because you have a Snap Store version available as well. Okay, and that one's actually a little bit older than the FlatHub one. Very interesting. So they do have Snap and Debian repository based and Flatpak. So they basically have a lot of the different formats there for different packages. So that's kind of neat. And I actually do like the fact that you can see your source right up there in the top right corner. But the issue, I think, for people who are unfamiliar with working with the command line, this is a problem. And the problem is this updates. All these updates you see here, these are Flatpak specific. I think maybe if I had a Snap update in there, it would be showing up here. But these, it only gives you updates, or it can find updates for stuff that's, a Flatpak thing. It can't go out and reach out to the repository and see any updates. And it's very slow. So doing updates via this software center, it seems to be a lot slower. Like if I were to click on this, it would take quite a while to actually update. And you're actually better off, in my opinion, going with, not that, but going with basically command line to do your updates. So for someone who doesn't feel comfortable with doing command line updates, it may not be a very good operating system for those individuals long term. Or maybe it would be, they would feel okay using it, but then they wouldn't realize that there's a lot of updates coming out that they're not getting because they didn't go here to the command line to pull the updates. And it's been like this for, I don't know, a good several months now, or not several months. I've only been noticing this for about a month and a half, but it just doesn't pull the packages. Like this is actually telling me right here that they do have an update to the kernel now. So 5.13.051. So they do have a kernel update that's available. And you don't see that over here in the Software Center. So what you're seeing in the Software Center is basically the Flatpak updates. Those are the same ones right there, the org.free desktop stuff and this add WADA style. I'm not actually going to do that right now. So the Software Center itself, whereas it looks pretty decent, and you can actually see all the installed programs that you have here on the system, and it does let you choose between Flatpak, Snap, and repository. It's not good from an update perspective. I've just noticed that trying to do the updates for Flatpak via the store, it's just a lot slower. It seems to take a lot less time than me doing it here from command line, and it doesn't do any of the updates for the actual repository stuff, the actual OS stuff, unless you go to command line. Now, I will give credit where credit's due. I've had actually quite a few kernel updates in the short amount of time that I've used this operating system, and every single time, and using NVIDIA drivers, this is one thing you sometimes worry about. Will it boot up and my graphics card work on a reboot? And I have had no problems doing that from the command line. So it does work every single time when you update it via command line, and it'll update it'll integrate the graphics and the kernel together. I've had no issues with that. So I definitely want to point out that that has worked for me every single time. And I've upgraded the kernel at least 3 times, if not 4 or more. So that definitely works. But a new user who feels intimidated by the command line will probably be missing out on the full range of updates that they could have available to them. And so that's just one thing I'd like to point out as far as that's concerned. Other than that, the Software Center itself is actually pretty decent. I do like it. There's icons for all the different software available. So that's a nice aspect of it. Now, one thing I'll say though, because this is a GNOME-based operating system, and they do focus so heavily on Flatpaks for up-to-date packages, one of the things I've noticed is theming. Theming doesn't work very well or at all sometimes. Well, now this is kind of working. That's oh, because this is the repository version. So I installed an older version of Ocular. Let me pull that up real quick. So this is version 193, and this is a Qt based software. So the one I installed was from Zorin OS, whereas this one with FlatHub, if I had installed the FlatHub version of this, the theming would have looked really bad, because you can tell right here that I haven't installed it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that real quick, and I'll probably edit out how long it takes for it to download this, and I'll meet you back here momentarily, and we'll just show you theming side by side for the repository-based package and the Flatpak-based package. So be right back. Okay, we are back now, and I basically got the Flatpak version of Ocular installed along with the repository version. So as you can tell here, the repository version is the one I have pulled up, and theming is working very good. It has my same GNOME theme that I have for the whole desktop environment. Excuse me. It is version 1.9.3, but if you'll notice when I jump over here to the Flatpak version, none of my theming carries over to the Flatpak version. That's one thing I've noticed. Now, obviously, the version is a lot newer. So if you want the more up-to-date packages on your system, this is an issue with the GNOME desktop environment and Qt-based Flatpaks. So Qt based Flatpaks are not going to get any of the theming. Now, I don't know if there's any way around that. Actually, I tried to do a little bit of searching to figure out if there's any way to get that working, and it didn't seem like there was any way to do it. And another thing I want to point out is I just went to install that, and it took a really long time to install that one singular package. And it did actually, if I go here, you'll see it actually did download a couple of the NVIDIA Flatpak versions. They're about 330 megabytes each. And so it just took a very long time to download those updates, and then it downloaded the Ocular. And without those NVIDIA Flatpak updates, it wouldn't have worked. So that's a bit of an issue as well. But it did eventually get updated. I kind of looked here because you see one of these. I think this one up top was the one that was actually downloading at the time. So it definitely the software center itself is a little bit slow, and so anything that's GTK based should get your theming, but any Qt based Flatpak may not. Oh, I pulled up one of my it pulled up one of my backgrounds. That's cool. So I do have a background changer on here that I'd like to download called Variety, and I don't believe that was installed by default. But that's the next thing I'd like to point out is the default packages. Another issue I've had with the operating system. For instance, I don't like the GNOME PDF program that's built in, but you can actually not delete it. It has to stay there. Try to see if I can find it. I think it would be under Office, maybe. No, it's not under Office. Oh, here it is. Document Viewer. So, Document Viewer is the events program that they use with GNOME, and I'm just not a big fan of it. But unlike other operating systems that I've used, it doesn't even give me the option to remove it. So there's certain programs that are installed and they don't even give you the chance to remove them. Let me see if I can't find them here in the software center. So right here, these system applications like calculator, characters, there it is, events, the files program. So all of these Snapd. So if you actually wanted to get rid of Snap, you can't do it via the software center. So a lot of these things they're like, this is it. You're not going to be able to get rid of these whether you want to or not. And some of it seems weird. Like, why should I have to keep this document viewer? Because it is truly an inferior document viewer to Ocular or even the Atrial for the Mate desktop environment. But that's just one of the quirks of Zorin operating system. Other than that, I think that's pretty much a lot of my main focuses. There's certain programs that you can't uninstall. Qt based Flatpaks don't get any of the theming, and that can lead to basically an inconsistent environment. And then basically, if you're not familiar with command line, updates via the software center just don't work. And things that do work very slowly. So those are my main gripes with the operating system, really. I do think it looks attractive, and I just like the theming and whatnot of the desktop environment. The way they've modified GNOME here, I like it. It does work. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure this is something that I would want to use long term. I think it definitely focuses more on beginning users. For someone who's got a little more experience with Linux, I think you might actually kind of grow out of the Zorin OS fairly quickly and just want to go try something else out. And I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't think I would want to use this long term. I don't want to knock it. I think it does have its place in the ecosystem, as it were. It's a good OS, and they did a great job integrating the NVIDIA drivers into the operating system. So I definitely have got to give them good kudos there. Uh, it's a pretty decent operating system. I don't think I put it in the upper echelon by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an Ubuntu based operating system, so a lot of programs are just going to work better on it. Um, I did fire up Bioshock Infinite, for instance, on here, and some of the config changes that I had to make to get that to work on Solus, I didn't have to do with Zorin. So that's really nice. And it does work, and it works well. But at the end of the day, I'd probably give this about an 8 out of 10 because there's just certain things about it that just don't click together. And the theming with flat packs is one of those things that I think is probably one of the more glaring aspects of things that just don't jive together. So it does seem to have a inconsistent look about it. But what's there is pretty decent. I do like the task menu. I think it's a it has a very good appearance to it. It's very well laid out. I've just installed a lot of packages, so sometimes I kind of get a little lost trying to find stuff. But I mean, you can shut down, reboot, even lock the screen from here, and or just log out. So it does have a lot of good features about it. And to be fair, with such a small development team, they've done an amazing job. They really have. But I think this is definitely, I mean, even they would say it's geared towards beginners. My only issue is that a beginning user may not recognize some of the problems going on with, say, the software center, and they may fall into a trap where basically they don't get a lot of security updates that they probably would need. And so that could be a long term issue for sure. And that software center, I don't think has been fixed since I've had this installed about 2 months ago. That's definitely something to keep in mind. But I'd say overall, probably about 8 out of 10. It's a decent operating system. And, if you want an Ubuntu based OS and you want to try the GNOME desktop environment, but you want to have more of a Windows centric view, then this is actually a pretty good OS to give a try because it does keep that familiarity for Windows users that your standard GNOME desktop environment just isn't going to have. It's going to be a much steeper learning curve to get into your standard GNOME environment when you're transitioning from Windows. So for that aspect, I definitely say they do a lot of things right here, but there are certain things that hopefully when they come out with the next version of Zorin OS, they will work through some of these bugs and inconsistencies. But I have a feeling that some of the visual aspects are going to always remain because they like to base themselves off of the long-term service release of Ubuntu. And so for them to get around software versions not getting frequent updates, they're definitely going to be tied heavily to the Flatpak environment and to a lesser extent Snap. But and that could still affect it moving forward. But anyway, I think that's the majority of my thoughts with the Zorin operating system. It's a good one, and if you feel like sticking with the Ubuntu based ecosystem and want to try out the GNOME environment, but don't want to go full bore into the GNOME, this may be worth your time. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.